Hello, Professor. Nice to speak to you again. For this assignment of addressing societal challenges, I have decided to do research and learn about supporting undocumented students. This training is designed to be presented to staff in maybe 45 minutes if I could get that much time, or shorter. I can talk fast if I have to, I suppose. So we'll begin by talking about what is an immigrant, who is an immigrant. Goodman says there are four classifications: legal, undocumented, naturalized, and mixed status. In a mixed status family, there are both documented and undocumented immigrants. In our current political environment, people around the country have been given license to act out their fear and hatred of people who are different from themselves. This is a film called Undocumented Americans that was created by the American Psychiatric Association. It talks about three young people who have grown up undocumented and some of the things that they feel and some of the things that have happened to them and the challenges that they've had to overcome because of their legal status. I would show the film in its entirety. It's about 10 minutes long. I'm not going to show it to you right now, but if you'd like to watch it later, of course, you're welcome to. Several months ago, I had the honor to work on a show called Undocuments by a local Austin artist named Jesus Valles. Uh, Jesus was born in Ciudad Juarez and was brought to El Paso when he was 9. He was smuggled into the country and grew up undocumented. He finally became a naturalized citizen towards the end of his teenage years. It's a beautiful, beautiful show. And all of it is very poignant and meaningful. But the particular phrase, paperwork becomes personhood at a certain point, um, has really, really stuck with me, and that's why I added it into this PowerPoint. That legal status is really just a piece of paper. It's not an attitude. It's not a feeling. It's just a piece of paper. And for lack of a piece of paper, our children are growing up terrified. Currently, in the state of Texas, there are 1,600,000 undocumented people. Of that number, 158,000 of them are children between the ages of 3 and 17. Some of those students will never enter into our classrooms because their parents are too afraid to send them to school. But for those students who do come to school, just like other students who are suffering the kinds of trauma that we've been talking about through this entire course, they are ruled by fear, right? The fears are different. They're afraid of ICE raids, which can happen at any time, right? They're afraid of deportation, either their own deportation or that of their caregivers. There are also fears and complex situations that come when a child is reunified with their family. If the caregivers have left their home country, left the child in the care of another person, and then years later brings the child to the United States, there are a lot of complex situations that can arise out of that. There are a lot of thoughts and feelings about meeting this person who says that they're your mom or your dad, and then meeting this child that you remember as a toddler, right? It can be very, very scary for kids. So, how can we support undocumented students? It's important to remember that schools are often the first exposure to America for students who have newly arrived in the United States, right? And even if they aren't new, schools are often the way that immigrant families interact with America. Given that, it's important to monitor our use of language, right? We can try avoid using the words illegals or aliens or using the phrase people who are here illegally. It's also important for us to speak inclusively and not cut off a portion of our student body because of the legal rights that they may or may not have. Like dealing with any other person who has suffered a trauma, creating a warm and welcoming environment is very, very important. And in this situation, that goes for not just the students, but also for the family. How are we welcoming our families into our schools, regardless of their legal status? You can also identify yourself as an ally by using inclusive language or by hanging posters, which seems like a really radical thing to do. But I found a website called Immigrants Rising, and they have a whole slew of posters like the one that you see on this slide. Communication that is sent from the school to the home should be in the family's primary language. Um, I know that that kind of goes without saying, but it has to be said, particularly if you've got a family that's in fear of the government or in fear of deportation, and you send home a letter that they don't understand, that they can't read. That letter can be very, very scary, right? Additionally, though, oftentimes if the student is the only person in the family who speaks English, right, then they are put into the role of translator and interpreter, and that is not okay. We should also strive to create community by connecting students to one another and to outside organizations. It's really important for us to help students develop a sense of agency, to understand what their legal status means and what they can do to help themselves. And of course, that would be age dependent. I'm not saying that you should have a first grader writing documentaries and picketing, and not in the least. But it is important that students know that they're not alone, right? Trauma, any kind of trauma, can be very, very isolating. But we know that these students are not alone, and helping them find one another is a really great way to strengthen them. If anti-immigrant harassment is happening at school, it needs to be addressed immediately. Earlier this week, I talked about using circles to talk about racism, and harassment and anti-immigrant sentiments would also be ideal topics to talk about in a circle once you've developed that level of trust, of course. It's also important that we as educators understand institutional policies and laws, right? It's important to know where your state stands on the rights of immigrant students, right? Can they get in-state tuition when they go to college? Can they apply for financial aid? Are there scholarships or grants that they are eligible for? They're out there, but we have to look for them. It's also important that we understand law, right? Understand what are the rights of the students who are in our classroom. And I know that that's a lot to ask for educators. And I know that we have already a lot of things on our plate, but these are our children. And we have to stand for them. Because if we don't stand for them, who will? In that vein, because I'm asking so much of us, we also need to create our own networks of support. Just like when you're dealing with trauma of any other kind, right? We are at risk of secondary trauma. So it's important that we have developed our own self-care routines and that those are supported by the administration. That's it for this PowerPoint. This is the first of 2 reference slides for your perusal. And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.